gathering data from various sources over the past few months and talking to internal communication practitioners, many of them my current students on the internal communication diploma, and some past students. Now, of course, gathering data around, what internal comms people have been doing during COVID-19 is a bit tricky. Not a lot of hard data is published. So this is my summary, if you like, of what I've gathered from various sources and from talking to people. And, it's basically a really good picture. Internal communication people have really, I think, stepped up, mainly, moving quickly, responding to fast changing situations, providing frequent, accurate and trusted content, which is absolutely critical, during the COVID-19 situation. And that results in reassurance for employees. They want to feel reassured about what's going on, even in difficult circumstances such as being furloughed. The second thing that comes out is this, obvious, I suppose, increased use of digital platforms. And I don't just mean, using Zoom or Teams like we're doing today, but, the increased use of those platforms for discussions. And one of the things that came out of this for me, which I didn't really fully appreciate, was I was talking to a former student recently inside a large consultancy organization, and he was saying to me how they've used internal digital platforms for peer-to-peer connectivity, enabling people in different parts of the business to just share stories about what their life in lockdown is like across the organization. And that's something that hadn't really happened very much in that organization before. So that connectivity is great because obviously people working from home more, do feel more isolated. So the ability to use digital platforms to connect is a really positive thing. The other thing that people talk about a lot is this increased leadership visibility. Now, I know CIPR side have done a webinar on leadership visibility before. And I wanted to really highlight this because, again, people have told me about, senior managers doing regular, weekly, short, informal videos, something they would never really have done before. Although I also pick up stories of continuing reluctance from some senior managers to do this kind of thing as well. So it's a patchy picture, but in general, the sense I get is much more, higher levels of leadership visibility. And of course, going along with that, much more use of regular pulse surveying, which is getting good information back from employees in terms of what they're thinking and feeling, what their concerns are. And that's a really good thing because it does demonstrate empathy with employees. If, of course, there's a couple of big ifs around that, if the communication from leadership, from our leaders is striking the right tone, and if better use of pulse surveys is resulting in responding to what employees are saying. No good to do regular pulse surveys if nothing ever gets back on them. Now, a combination of all that leads to higher levels of trust. That's the theory anyway, and I think there's some indications that we are seeing that. So to summarize the current climate, some data I wanted to share with you here, which I think reinforces this mixed picture. And then we'll go on to think about what's coming up. So some data here that I've gathered. Now this data, these percentage figures, they are a little bit dated. This is from May, I believe, the data here. So we've got these two things, 87% satisfaction from employees. These were employees who were surveyed, and 87% of them said they were satisfied with being kept informed. So that's a really, pretty good result actually. And 68% said they were confident in the approach being taken by leaders. Now, I think 68% is not, too bad actually, given all the difficult circumstances that we're experiencing. So I think that they're both positive figures. But on the other hand, in the same survey, 42% of employees said they felt anxious, and 25% said they felt they were demotivated. Now, this is interesting to me because I've also heard and picked up some data from the US, which has suggested that employees are more engaged or have been more engaged during the COVID-19 situation. And that kind of, is interesting. And I'm not sure really where that engagement comes from. It could be, I think, possibly from a greater sense of having to work together in difficult circumstances. So it's an engagement around teamwork rather than necessarily engagement with the organization. So there is a mixed picture coming through here. For some people, there's tragedy, personal tragedy, anxiety and frustration. For others, there's benefits from working from home, such as a slower pace of life and no commute. One of the things I picked out here, and this is a US study, only 49% of respondents in the study said they believe their organization is very or extremely interested in hearing employee feedback. So that is something I wanted to flag up and come back to, because that suggests that we're not really into full listening mode yet. One thing is true, I think though, this I read in a recent CIPD report, anxiety about returning to work certainly isn't subsiding. So although this data here is a little bit dated, this anxiety point, it holds true now. So just to sum up, what are employees rightly expecting, when the return to the workplace comes through? Flexible options for returning. So they want to be given various different options about coming back, whether it's 1 day, 2 days, staggered start times, all sorts of options that they want to be able to take advantage of, that address their individual needs and expectations. And then there's this sense of fairness. Employees really rightly want to see their organisation treating everybody fairly. So there's no different options for different groups of people across the board. And this plays into something which I think is really interesting called social justice, which is coming through more. And we're seeing much more emphasis on organisations treating employees with much more care and attention, which we sometimes call this thing called social justice at work. So, the way that organisations really do think deeply about their employees. By the way, when it comes to working from home, a recent survey, 54% of employees said they would like to work from home more regularly. And that's a LinkedIn survey with 2,000 UK employees. 41% said that 41% of employers said they would support further working from home. That was a Chartered Institute Personnel and Development study. And 34% of employees who are working from home say it's had a negative impact on their mental well-being. And that was an Opinion research with 1,250 employees. So that paints the picture, really, I think, for the challenges we're going to face, as well as the big restructures and reorganizations that we're going to have to be working with in the future. But anyway, to get back to expectations, the physical safety is obvious, the psychological safety is less obvious, and it comes through very strongly. Employees will want to, almost be treated as individuals with managers knowing their individual circumstances. They want to see care, kindness, and understanding, not just for them as individuals, though, across the piece. Listening and dialogue, and these points came through in some opinion pieces in a recent People Management magazine. We've known about listening, and I'm doing some research on listening with colleagues Mike Pounsford and Howard Crace, and we've published 2 reports, Who's Listening reports, which you can download for free from the PR Academy website if you're interested. But the whole thing about listening is becoming much more, of its moment, for various reasons, not only, the way that employees need to be treated when they return to the workplace, but also the whole sort of diversity and inclusion movement. So listening is going to come to the fore. And as I said in the previous slide, we're still not really getting to grips with embedding listening as a day-to-day ongoing process. But it's not just listening, it's responding appropriately and making listening an ongoing business as usual process, as important almost as informing employees, which we do very well. And this kind of manifests itself, into dialogue, so moving from a sort of a lesser message-oriented kind of approach to internal communication to a dialogical approach, which includes listening and communicating with people. So to sum up, really, before I move over, sort of hand over to Paul, I wanted to talk about the challenges that are coming. When organisations, have to, make major restructures, deal with significant redundancies. Indeed, I was talking to somebody recently where they're going to, they had to announce quite significant redundancies, quite quickly into the COVID-19 process. And one of the things they did, they set up an anonymous forum on their internal digital platform. Normally, I'm not a fan of anonymity within sort of those forums, but it made complete sense because of the suddenness of the announcement that people were able to raise issues anonymously in that environment, and that works really well. But so we've got to combine normalcy, making things seem as normal as whatever that will be, and we've got to combine that with probably some really major significant change programs that are going to be introduced inside organizations. So for me, the principles are, as I said here, maintaining the gains. It's not a case of going back to old ways of leadership visibility not being very strong. Where we've got leadership visibility in place, we've got to keep that going. It's a business as usual process. We have to embrace the digital, and I know we've done that really well in internal comms. But what I mean by that is go beyond, using digital platforms as another push channel. We've got to streamline all the channels, because otherwise digital just becomes another channel to add to the list. We've got to do some proper auditing of channels, streamline the channels that are working best for employees. And that comes along with, community management and community leadership. We will only get the gains from encouraging people to participate in digital platforms when there's really good community management in place. Listen all the time. I've mentioned that already. Listening is really important. And the big one, I think, is this is our time in internal comms to really be assertive. And go into those major change programs that are going to be set up right from the start. Get in at the B of the bang when the program gets going, and be assertive. Be clear about good internal communication being the fundamental point that's going to make any change program successful, and be really clear and firm about what is good and what is not good internal communication in a change program. So it's a challenge, but I think a fantastic opportunity that we'll have, in the coming months. So with that, thank you. I'll now just hand over to Paul to take you through the final piece of the presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Kevin. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I think really a real pleasure for me to be contributing to one of these events. I've been in the audience at many great CIPR Inside events over the years, so good to have this opportunity to pay back a little. As Padraig said in the introduction, so I work for the NHS, and as in all sectors, there's been a huge amount of change and digital transformation in the NHS over the last 4 or 5 months now. The most obvious has been the way that we're interacting with each other as staff on a one-to-one or a large group basis, but also crucially the way we're interacting with patients with outpatient activity having become largely remote, a lot of it telephone, but increasingly video conference. But up on the screen then, so 3 things I keep hearing, and I want to kind of reflect on a little bit today. I guess what I'd like to do in my 10-15 minutes is really to reflect a little bit on the experience that we've all been having, and particularly I've been having in the NHS, working for a large London hospital trust, and measure that up really against the kind of standard theory and practices around change and change communication. How well is it measuring up, and what might we have learned from this experience? Because one of the things that I'm constantly hearing, weeks may have become months now, but a huge amount of digital change has been achieved in a short period of time because of the need to respond to coronavirus. And there was I saw an interesting question in the chat from Steve D, which we'll pick up in a couple of slides time, which plays into that, I think. And then there's this thing of, I keep hearing we're never going to go back to the old ways of working. So how much of this change that we've gone through is for good, it's for permanent, and is going to stick. And then the third one, going into lockdown was hard. Coming out of lockdown is even harder. Again, I think this plays back to the question in the chat, but also into something Kevin said about the nervousness of people who have been working at home. And obviously, where I work, we've got a mix of people, clinical people who have been working very much on site in the hospitals, and other people have been working at home. So those three things are three things I want to reflect on. But if we just move to the next slide, Kevin. I thought before we go any further, it's always just worth remembering, and this gives you a bit of ammunition if you ever need it. Why is change communication so important? Why is it important, as Kevin said, for communications people to be involved earlier? So this is a little bit of research from Towers Watson, and what they did was look at, compare organizations which are really good at change and change communication, and compare their practice with those who are, let's say, less good. And what's the difference? And you can see there on the left, 5 of the big things and how closely they relate to communication and engagement. So if I just take the middle 3, for example, so clearly articulating what employees need to do differently to be successful, communication, what the change means to individuals, and then this 4th one, sense of ownership, so very much around the engagement piece. But obviously the top one, executive sponsor, is always going to be a key part of any communications and engagement strategy, and that measurement of progress, which is often so hard to get, is really useful in communications. But what does, if we get it right, what does it give the organization? What does it give staff? Again, this echoes very much with what things that Kevin's been saying. If we get it right, less anxiety, less uncertainty, better ability to cope with the change, and more likely for reactions to the change to be positive. So I guess that's the prize as we think about change communication, how to do it well. So if we move on, next one. So I've given this to Simon Sinek, but I guess it could be any number of people, starting with why. What's the reason for the change? And sometimes this can be a really difficult conversation. I'm going to share a couple of models later on that I use for those conversations that Kevin was talking about getting in, I like that expression, on the B of bang, and talking to people about change. And those simple questions around why, what are we trying to achieve, and what behavior change do we want, are often very difficult. And this is where the comment in the chat plays in. I think I agree with that comment. Certainly in my world, the need to respond to coronavirus, the need to keep our patients and our staff safe as we did that, to really change the way, reconfigure the way we deliver care, has been a rationale and a goal that it's been very easy for everyone in the organization to buy into. And it's also helped a lot, I think, with the relevance of a lot of what is in our communication channels. A lot of the noise has been cut out. It's helped the organization do something which most organizations are very bad at, which is prioritization. It really has forced that, and it has made it a lot easier to keep a lot of the noise out of those communication channels. So if we move on, so interesting distinction from, it comes from Bridges and Mitchell, and it's this distinction between change and transition, which I think might be quite significant for us right now. So the distinction is that the change is the external thing. In my world, often it's a new bit of digital technology, but it could be a new policy, a practice, a structure, anything new that a leader wants to introduce. And then the transition is the internal thing, the psychological change or reorientation that everyone has to go through before that change can really be successful. And I guess a concern would be, because we've moved so rapidly over the last few weeks and months, has the change happened a lot more quickly than that transition, that psychological reorientation? And Bridges and Mitchell have this, one of those three stage models of change, which go back, I think, to Kurt Lewin. If you've come across that iceberg, that block of ice type model, where you're unfreezing, you're making the change, and then you're refreezing. So it's kind of an extension of that. But again, where are we? Where are people, and are they in different places in this stage of transition? I think one of the phrases on Kevin's slide was the mixed picture. I'm sure people are at lots of different stages in this journey. So moving on and staying with the psychological aspect, I guess, this plays into behavioral insights, if you've come across that, explanations about the ways that people make decisions. And it's very easy for us to make the mistake, I'm sure I've done this many times in the past, make the mistake of thinking that everybody makes decisions very rationally, weighing up the pros and cons, but we know really that that's not the way it happens. So this elephant rider and path comes from one of my favorite books on change from the Heath brothers, Chip and Dad Heath, reference at the bottom of the screen there. And it's a book called Switch. We'll see a little bit more of that on the next slide. But the other terms are, so System 1 and System 2 come from Daniel Kahneman, automatic and reflective come from Taylor and Sunstein. So that's their, from the Nudge book from 2008, sorry. And this distinction then is that the two parts of the brain, the older part of the brain, which has been there for thousands of, gone through a long evolutionary journey, makes quick decisions based on instinct and intuition, which is great, but does jump to a lot of conclusions, has biases, has psychological biases, but does make a lot of the decisions. And we couldn't survive without it. And then System 2, or the rider in the Heath brothers terminology, newer part of the brain thinks about things rationally, but that's hard work, isn't it? And that means that part of the brain is slower and tires easily. And it can mean that, so a lot of it, as we said, a lot of decisions are made by the System 1, but System 2 is very good at rationalizing those decisions and giving apparently rational explanations for the way we made those. So I think very important to bear these things in mind and think about the different ways that people make decisions. So the final one there is the one that the Heath brothers ask, and this is the path of situation. Is something in the environment stopping change? If we just move on to the next slide. So Kevin talked a little bit about surveys around people who've been remote working, and I'm sure this has been done by lots of organizations. We've certainly done it, trying to understand the situations that different people have been working in and under as they're working remotely, working at home. And so the situation is something that we don't know as much about as we might normally. But this is from the first chapter of that book on change, and these three surprises. So one is about the situation. So what looks like a people problem is often a situation problem, something in the environment which is actually making it difficult for people to change a behavior which they understand why they need to do it, they understand what they need to do, but something is blocking it. What looks like laziness is often exhaustion. So change is a very tiring thing. Often it will mean that things that we've been doing in a certain way for years and we can do on autopilot without thinking, we suddenly have to think about because they're new ways of doing it, and that is tiring. And then something which may be very important again here right now, what looks like resistance is often lack of clarity. So does the rider in that rider elephant and path model, does the rider know what to do? I've just thrown this one, and this was a bit of a research that, yeah, go ahead, Kevin. This was a bit of research that I did back in 2015, just around what people want to know about change programs. And I guess no surprises there, the vision, the why for both the change and why I as an individual need to change. But these two in the middle were important as well, the organization's ability to make the change and individuals' ability to make the change. Have I got the skills, the skills and knowledge to be able to do that? So that's kind of a checklist that I bear in mind. Often when people are asking about in any change program, there comes a moment when we ask about readiness for change, and that has often been the formation for a spot of research for me, the foundation for a spot of research on that. And then I think last slide, no, two more, sorry. So this, I talked about those conversations with can be change leaders, senior managers, anybody involved in project manager, anybody involved in implementing a change. And those conversations that as communications people, we need to really understand what the change is all about, because before you can even begin to put pen to paper on a strategy or a plan for communications engagement. So the one on the left is Arrow. This is from Sue Dewhurst. I really like this. It starts with the aim, and then that kind of reality check. Okay, the aim is your ambition, but what's the reality? Where are we now? Roadblocks, what could get in the way? Again, really, really important question. The one on the right is one that I came up with really, and this was just me trying to describe in the model the conversations that I was having so often with people. So this is CAPE, starting off with context. Again, similar to the aim, what are we trying to do? Where does it fit? A crucial one, I think. One of my colleagues, however big picture you might think you're being, she will always say, yeah, but there's a bigger picture. So where does this fit in? How can we make it coherent for the people we're talking to? Audience, who's involved? What do we want them to do? What's the behavior change again? Who influences them? What's their feeling about this change? And then on to plan. But first of all, what's the plan in terms of implementation? What are the milestones? And then the comms and engagement plan. And crucially, at the end, the evidence. And again, this one can be a really difficult one to pin down, but we're trying to change something. How are we going to know if we've been successful? And I'm a big fan of both outputs and outcomes. Often people will say, yeah, outcomes, but what we really need are outcomes. I think you need both. So it's just the things that are more easily measurable, as well as the longer term goals that we're trying to achieve. And then finally, this is from Exploring Internal Communications. That's Kevin's, a book that Kevin edited, and I did a chapter on change comms for it. And this was kind of the summary, some tips on getting change communication right. I think we probably covered a lot of these. But I guess if I pick out 4 and 5, so giving people the communication engagement they need. It takes time for people to make sense of change. One of the ways to make it more likely that people will engage with thinking about things rationally rather than gut reaction is if they have more information. So giving people opportunity to collect more information, to discuss it with colleagues, and to make sense of change is really important. And then working with leaders, followers, and early adopters. In my world, the best person to explain a change is a clinician who's already a bit of digital technology, a clinician who's already using that digital technology, loves it, and wants their peers to use it as well. So, Porrig, I think it's back to you, sir, for questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paul, for that. And I think some really good thoughts and insights there. And I particularly liked your third last slide with all the different points we need to be thinking about when it comes to change for building, I suppose, the story within the organisation. And I think that's really kind of crucial at the moment, given that, you know, the way teams are under pressure with managing BAU comms for COVID. We have recruitment freezes, we've cuts on freelancers and contractors. So I think like a large challenge we're all going to have is when stakeholders and directors come to us at the moment, you know, I want to do change correctly. I think that's a really useful tool for building the case around what it actually means to manage and communicate change programs correctly. You know, so I think that's a really useful resource, and I found that particularly valuable. We have some thoughts and questions after coming in here. So let me just scroll up, just give me a second to have a look. So Paul, one for you. With change being the new constant, wouldn't we be better spending our time creating a culture of change rather than going around the same cycle each time?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. One of the things that I'm always really keen on is, in terms of comms and engagement, is kind of spreading that, because I mean, where I work, we're quite lucky. We have a reasonably large communications engagement team compared with some other NHS trusts, but it's still, you know, a very, very, very small percentage of the organisation. So I'm always saying, well, you know, most of the communication is actually communication engagement is being done not by the communications and engagement team.
Yeah.
So the more you can spread, but I mean, some of the things I've been talking about over the last 15 minutes are, for me, the way that communications and engagement people think. So the more that we can spread communications and engagement thinking and change communication thinking amongst the operational people that we work with, the better. So I absolutely agree. Spreading those skills and creating that culture and creating that way of thinking properly about change. I often say to people I work with, you know, you're going to cut down the flow of crazy requests if you spread that thinking better. So I agree. Kevin, I don't know whether you have reflections on that.
Yeah, I know, it's a great question, isn't it? You know, I think it's much more about having good principles in place for communication generally. And then if you build up trust in the organization, if you've got good listening in place, got good communications in place, you in your trust bank, when you come to do any change, or when, you know, the next change after the last one, you know, that trust bank is, you know, if you've got a good bank to build on. So for me, good internal communication principles that are ethical and ethical practice is the bedrock that underpins any change. You know, it doesn't, whatever the change is, if you've got a good, solid, you know, internal communication and engagement system in place, that change is going to be more likely to be successful. So yeah, it's all those things we talked about leadership, visibility, honesty, transparency, authenticity, listening authentically, responding on an ongoing basis, doing as much listening as you do informing and communicating, thinking, you know, treating people fairly, equally, you know, putting kindness. Some people even talk about a culture of love for employees. You know, this is this emotional culture rather than a rational culture. You know, so if we can build this kindness, care, you know, as part of what we do on an ongoing basis, that's all solid stuff that when the change comes, you know, it's likely to be more successful.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gavin. One question is coming from Orla, which kind of ties into what we were just speaking about. How do you go about developing the messaging for a change project? Who is involved in the process? How do you test it? So maybe if we address that question, maybe Kevin and Paula, and maybe some tips or best practice, what you've kind of experienced yourselves over the years, maybe from maybe one or two large scale projects you've done, some best practice you could share with us. I know for me it's around being a conduit for that change and creating the messaging and getting the wider change team to be the way you're advocates for it as well. So maybe one or two examples of what's worked well for that over the years, for what you've been involved in.
Well, I've got one at BT. You know, one of the biggest transformation programs. It was when I was working at BT's IT division. At that point, the IT division gave free rein pretty much to people working in it to develop their own pet projects, to develop new IT systems or processes, and there were 4,000 individual pet IT projects being run in BT's IT division. A new chief executive came in and he says, right from the start, I'm going to reduce that 4,000 to 40, and every one of those 40 IT projects has got to be signed off by a business partner from a customer-facing part of BT. And in doing that, we're going to move straight into an agile way of doing IT development. And we're going to have people going on the bench. And we're going to, you know, this was his thing. But he had the most clear vision of where he was going to be in 18 months' time. But the way he went around it, you know, so he had a very clear message of where the vision, what it was going to be, why that was important, because, you know, we had to do IT projects in BT that were going to serve a customer purpose and either improve customer satisfaction or improve revenue and profit, rather than just follow a lot of pet projects that might end up nowhere. So his vision was absolutely clear and very stark, you know, to the current situation. So the messaging was clear, but the way he went about it, he did a whole, and I was involved in this, taking around to everybody, various sites on an ongoing basis. He did small gatherings, went to offices, talked to people informally, 15, 20 people, and he did, larger town hall events and so on and so forth, and we did online stuff, all the rest of it. He was very open to people sort of saying, that's all very well and good, but, for example, he was challenged quite strongly on, agile methodology being suitable for some of the big, large-scale IT programs. And he did listen. So what he did was, I think the messaging was clear, but he was also very clear that he was going to listen and adapt and do things in a different way where people could come up with saying something that made sense, but his vision was not going to change. He was still going to get to 40 IT projects within that period, and he did it. And to be fair, it was a lot of people really, went with him because of the way he was prepared to listen to them on an ongoing basis and adapt the way he did it. But in terms, to answer your question, I think we get a little bit fixated with messaging, if I'm brutally honest. I'm not sure change programs are totally dependent on messaging. If we, I understand that, you have to have a clear message, to a degree, but for me, the message changes as you go through the program. So you start with the why, and then you might start with other messaging. And the point about messaging is to be adaptable and to tweak your messaging as you go through to meet the concerns and issues and worries that employees are expressing as they go through the change program. And I would rather take a listening approach to change management programs than a messaging one. More emphasis on just saying this is the broad, this is the program message in terms of what the program wants to achieve. And we're going to talk to lots of people, as we go through this, but we're going to be listening, putting more emphasis on listening than coming up with a fine-tuned, perfectly written, message. I think that can have unintended consequences if we focus too much on just a message. If that makes sense.
I'd agree with that. I'd agree with that, Kevin. I think listening is really important when it comes to change, and how you evolve that listening as you move through for different parts of the project. I have one here from Martin. Hi, Kevin and Paul. Great presentation. How do you think organisational culture will help or hinder change as we emerge from the pandemic? And what can internal comms do to influence that? So how do you think organisational culture will help or hinder change as we come through the pandemic? And what can we do to influence that? Paul, maybe, if you want to jump in.
So I'll start on this one. Yeah, so interesting question. Thank you, Martin. So I think there's something around, so if I think about my organisation, there's something around the way the experience that we've been through has strengthened the culture and brought to the fore the values that we have. So there may be something around building on that game, making sure that we don't lose that. There's been a real back to that kind of shared goal. There's been a real spirit of collaboration, both within the organisation and more widely across the NHS. So I think there's some real strength there in the culture that we can build on. But I think it is we are entering a more difficult phase because that clarity about what we're trying to achieve and how we're trying to achieve it as we come out of lockdown is not so easy. So I guess that would be my message really. There are some real gains there. I certainly feel that the culture in a sense has been strengthened. How do we continue to build on that and make sure we don't lose that? Kevin, do you want to?
Yeah, I read something recently with some organisations, moving almost to a total remote working kind of situation. So, and the culture they were sort of saying was going to change from a school-like culture, so where everyone comes in to a building and does 9 till 5, almost being like in school to a degree. And they're going to flip it, and it's going to be like, in their words, it's going to become a comic con culture, where basically what you do is everyone works from home 11 months of the year, and then for 2 weeks everyone comes to some massive exhibition hall, and dresses up. Well, maybe they don't dress up, but I mean they come to some massive exhibition hall and just have riotous fun, was how it was described. So this was a a school culture to a Comic Con culture? Well, I think, you know, for me, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, it might work for some organizations, yeah, you know, for sure. But for other, you know, I mean, as I sort of mentioned earlier, you know, there's evidence that people working from home for long periods of time do feel isolation. And there's evidence that, you know, mental well-being can be negatively impacted. So I'm not sure having a 2-week big bash in an exhibition hall is going to do much to negate that for those people personally. But I think the thing I would say is, in terms of cultures, there's some work from a US academic. She's a lady called Rita Men, who publishes some academic work in the US, who I think is one of the, you know, leading lights in the academic internal communication world. And you know, there are not many of us, to be honest, you know, academics in internal comms, but Rita Men is one. And I do recommend her work if you're interested in seeing the research that she's doing. But anyway, I mentioned Rita because she's come up with this idea of rational versus emotional culture. You know, there are many ways of describing cultures, many metaphors that we see used for describing cultures. You know, from Morgan's metaphors going back to the 80s to many others. Anyway, Rita talks about emotional versus rational. So a rational culture will be typified by, you know, leaders and senior managers and employees being driven by, you know, hard objectives, and a lot of the communication being driven about numbers, data, stats, facts, figures. Whereas an emotional culture is the one I was sort of talking about a little bit earlier, where we're talking about, you know, what the organization is doing to be fair to people, how it treats people, you know, what it's doing about diversity and inclusion, how it cares for individuals. You know, a culture typified by kindness, care, understanding, empathy. And I think communication is a big way of driving those cultures. So communication that's based a lot around facts, figures, data, stats will, you know, lead to more of a rational culture, whereas communication that's centered more around care, empathy, understanding, and listening will lead to a more emotional culture. So in terms of culture, comms, I think, drives culture. And some people say culture eats strategy for breakfast. Okay, my view is that communication can actually drive culture and eat strategy for breakfast. You know, so it's communication first drives culture, and an emotional culture for me is one that's going to be much more healthy for employees. And guess what? It's going to be much better when you do change management, because people will be more receptive to that change.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kevin. Speaking of kindness and compassion, very quick question here from Bob. Maybe Paul, Kevin, if a company or two comes to mind. We won't get into it too much as we're just running short for time. Have you been impressed with any particular organisation's management of comms during COVID-19? If so, what do you think they've been doing right? So anything you've seen with organisations you've worked with, or colleagues or peers that has particularly stuck out for you? So Kevin, I'll put you on the spot first, if there's anything you've seen over the last few months.
It's difficult, this one, because, you know, we don't often see, you know, what I would call really detailed case studies of internal communication practice, you know, for very good reasons, because people are sensitive about publishing, you know, survey data or information about what they do for internal communication. So what I get is what I hear from the students that I'm talking to on the internal communication diploma, and past students that I keep in touch with. And what, you know, is a mixed picture of good practice. You know, so for one organisation, which was, I won't say who it was a major sort of restaurant chain in the UK, you know, obviously had immediate difficulties, you know, closing all of its restaurants across the UK very early in March. And, you know, having to deal with putting people on furlough. And then some people had joined the organisation very recently and didn't qualify for furlough. So some very hard, you know, communications having to be done there. But you know what impressed me about what was done there was it was very honest and direct and quick and immediate. The communication was straightforward. You know, and the chief executive was like I was saying earlier, lots of leadership visibility, was very out there, very open and honest and clear, you know, about what was going on. And, you know, the internal communication person there was doing lots of really informal stuff. He said he was running, you know, quizzes and other informal stuff, on Zoom initially, because obviously there's a bit of quiz fatigue, but that's what he was doing, and it engendered some some way for employees to connect to other people, whilst they were furloughed. So there's that, and I think I mentioned the other one earlier. A past student I was talking to, ran this anonymous forum. That was an immediate, serious redundancy situation, and they decided to put an anonymous forum in place, which he advocated for, and got there was some pushback on it. But like I said before, anonymity necessarily isn't in normal day-to-day comms. I wouldn't be recommending that, but it was absolutely right for the situation, and he was brave enough to sort of go against sort of contemporary thinking and do that, and it worked really, really well, because they got some honesty, and they really got to understand what people were thinking and feeling at a very difficult time. So those two things stand out for me.
Brilliant, thanks, Kevin. Paul, what about yourself? Anything that comes to mind for you? One for me actually is Nando's. There was some messaging from internal that went external. That's one that stands out for me. Anything for you that stood out?
Yeah, I mean, I think amongst NHS organisations that I have contact with and work with, so I think maybe three things. So one is openness, being really sort of open with information and being honest about situations, and even when we don't know the answer, being very clear about that and being very honest. And the listening thing, I mean, I think Kevin mentioned his research had shown a lot more use of pulse surveys. So, but also through events like this, making sure that we're really listening to staff has been really important. And then also the focus on mental health and well-being in the comms channels, making sure that we're really focusing on that, highlighting what services we have available to staff who are obviously working in the NHS. Lots of people have been through very traumatic experiences, and there is help available for those people. So those three things, I think.
Brilliant, thanks, Paul. Some comments coming through, just saying thanks very much, some great insights. Thanks very much for the presentation today. One final one before we kick off. We're into the final 5 minutes of today, and this is one that is close to my heart as well. Any tips if senior management want help with change comms, but they maybe don't like the advice that you are giving them? A few views myself on this, but I'll hand over to one or two of you. I can sometimes be a bit brash being Irish when it comes to answering this one. I'll hand over to maybe you, Paul, for something a little bit.
I think Porrick, I think you should go first.
No, it's okay. I'll leave it off.
So much.
It won't be insight driven, my answer. So I'll leave you take this one.
Well, I guess I would go back to some of the
stuff on your third last slide is some really good insights for building that kind of narrative.
Yeah, so some of it is around the timing of communication, isn't it, and not waiting until you've got all the answers, because you never have all the answers. And then the stuff around authenticity. I know sometimes back in the day, we used to do web chats, not with my current organisation, but with a previous organisation. In the end, the answers that we gave would be kind of very glib and perfectly formed and not actually giving anything away. So there's something around honesty and authenticity in the way that you present yourself. And I guess the other thing is, again, not careful to say not in my current organisation, but I have had a couple of experiences where some message has gone out, maybe on the intranet or through an all staff email or something, which says this is the way what is happening, this is the way things are going to be. And then the first time that is challenged, somebody, a senior manager, does not behave in accordance with that, and then it's completely blown. So I guess it's kind of what you do is way more important than what you say, and if the two don't align, then we're in trouble.
Brilliant, thanks very much. We've just got 2 minutes left, so I think we will close off. For this session is being recorded, and we will make it available. Just give us a day or two to get it edited and up. and we will publicise it on our @CIPR Insight Twitter account. If you have any colleagues or anyone else in your organisation who think might benefit from this. Either Kevin or Paul will be recording a short video blog afterwards as well, with just some key thoughts and insights around it. Just give us a day or two as well on that to get that done and up. So keep an eye out for that also. I'd really like to thank Paul and Kevin for coming on today and sharing their insights with us. As I said, they're huge supporters of CIPR Insight, and we really appreciate that. Just to give it a little plug as well, both of them are involved in the CIPR Insight diploma, which kicks off in September, and you'll find more information on that on the PR Academy website also. Kevin, I might just hand over to you just to close out with any kind of key thoughts you have, and we'll finish up then. And once again, thank you everybody for taking an hour out today to join us, and we'll see you soon on our next event.
Okay, well, thanks again from Paul and myself for the invite to the session. Thanks for the great questions and the participation. Really interesting times, and I just think we've got to be bold as an internal communication profession. Be confident in our knowledge and our abilities, and even if we do get senior managers who you're not quite sure about what we're saying, just be assertive in the nicest possible way, because we're probably going to be right.
That is true. Thanks very much, and we'll sign off, and we'll see you all again soon. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Barry.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye now.